Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about floors and ceilings. This channel is all about breaking down the black box of life, business, and otherwise. So we are going to jump in with floors and ceilings. I'm going to draw some pictures, but just know that this applies to a lot of different areas of our lives. So this is not just if you're a business owner. I'm going to be giving some examples that are for business owners. I'm going to be giving some examples that are probably more personal in nature, but this same concept applies to a lot of different aspects of life. So I hope that this helps to make you more successful. Let's jump into it just now. All right, so the very first thing when you're talking about floors and ceilings, the words themselves don't mean anything new to you because you know what a ceiling is and you know intuitively what a floor is. And so when I say floors and ceilings, you're probably thinking, great, these feel like boundaries. And in fact, they are boundaries, because what starts to happen in our world and in the future, because I'm going to be drawing several pictures here, these two lines, the top one always represents ceiling and the bottom one always represents floor. And so what we find in business, in people, just performance in general, most of the time human performance is not just this linear kind of hockey stick thing. It's actually going to be a little bit more wavy. And by it being wavy, you can imagine that your floor, notice that I stayed inside of the lines. You'll notice that your floor down here, I never went past that line. Now I could even have redrawn this to hit the floor, but the point of a floor, what the floor means in this definition, is the lowest you will fall. And likewise, ceiling, we can't break past this ceiling. If you've heard of the concept of glass ceilings, then you know that that glass ceiling might be fake, but it's still a ceiling. It's still a boundary that we have to think about. So this ceiling here is the highest you will go. Okay? And so with that understanding in mind, the first thing that we have to think about is, what is the context of the situation? If our ceiling is, let's say that we grew up in a rough neighborhood and we felt like we couldn't escape that, that becomes our ceiling, right? But likewise, there becomes a certain point, to use a business example, where you have a certain amount of fixed cost. And so going below that floor, means that now you are operating at a loss. And so this floors to ceilings concept, ceiling would be the highest revenue that you've ever hit, and floor would be the lowest revenue that you can hit or can afford to hit. There's a couple different ways to look at that as to what that floor actually is. And so if we come back over and we look at kind of what we should learn about these floors and ceilings, the first step is that most of the time when we're talking about the floors and ceilings concept, and we have our ceiling up here and we have our floor down here, we realize that this is based on fear that is persistent. This is typically based more on one time, an event, right? And the reason why is because this persistent fear, it basically trains us to think that our ceiling is what it is. If you always thought that I would never be anything in life, or I would never accomplish this in my business, or I can only project out $100,000 months, then that would be your fear that is keeping you from persisting, right, past that line. It would keep you from breaking through that ceiling. But the thing about floors that's different is typically our floor is more of an event-based thing. Now, we obviously would need to say that if you had a persistent fear, some might say that that is the floor, but really what's happened is all we've done is we've compressed these two lines. We've brought them closer and closer together. And so some people's ceiling and other people's floor, they sit really close together. And so they end up vibrating and getting kind of stuck in this mode. And you'll notice that other people, they might have a significantly higher threshold on their ceiling and a significantly lower threshold here. But what about the instance where someone is just doing differently? So if you are here and you have your ceiling and your floor and you're comparing yourself to someone else who is here and here, then they could still have this tight relationship between their floor and their ceiling, but they're just at a different place. It might not even be comparable. Like this might be apples and this could be oranges, but at the end of the day, these are not comparable, but you are choosing to compare between your ceiling and floor to this person's ceiling and floor. We do this all of the time, and it's kind of natural behavior, but what we have to be mindful of is the progression to get here requires a change in behavior. And so what we have to acknowledge is two things, right? So the first thing, and actually I'll just use this page, the first thing is that if, for example, we're super productive and we're having a great time and we see that we're rising, right? Then great, that's fantastic. That means that you are soon to hit your ceiling and you're probably not having one-time events that are disrupting your floor. But at some point, an event will happen and it will bring you down to where your floor is. And when you realize what that floor is, the only way that you improve it is by changing your habits, by changing your operations, by changing your people, right? These are all things that can change your floor. And likewise on your ceiling, when we just think about it from a business context, this ceiling is basically top line revenue. And down here, it's profit. And so when we look at that from a business standpoint, well, now when we start to dwindle our profit, this curve starts to come back this way. And this right here is your zone of opportunity. And I call this the identification zone. So let's talk about that for a second. What is an identification zone? If you have a floor and a ceiling and you're trying to figure out kind of where you are on that curve, if you've reached a new height, right? A lot of times they say bad things happen in threes, right? But if you start to reach a new height and you're on top of the world and your life is going great, then that's a moment to document, to snapshot, right? Because you basically want to recur in that mode for as long as possible. But that's not how life works. We come back on a cycle and we come back down. And that downward trend is when we have an identification zone. And the identification zone is going to give us an opportunity to figure out what at our floor is the problem. So maybe it's, hey, I'm on top of the world and I'm filming this around the holidays, and you go home for the holidays and you kind of feel like the people around you aren't supportive. And so your headspace is wrong and you start to kind of dwindle into another space. And so what starts to happen is now your performance is coming down this way, right? You've now changed your position. And the identification zone is you went home for the holidays, right? And I'm not here to tell you whether you should or shouldn't, but that right there, that identification zone, if you want to raise your floor, then you're basically getting direct feedback from your own performance that says, stop doing the activity that's causing you to go down and start doing the activity that made you feel good in the first place. And in business, we do the same thing. So I'll give you an example. If we are here, and we have the ceiling and we have the floor, and our business revenue is looking like this, right? Then most likely what's happened is we get energized because we just came out of a floor, we get energized and we do all the things. So we're better marketers, we send more emails, we clear our calendar because we have less business because we're down here. So now we do a bunch more sales calls. And now all of a sudden we start to come up into this zone, right? And you're thriving, you're feeling great. And you're starting to see this ceiling. And this is when you can start to have more vision because you're like, hey, wait a second, I don't like being confined by this ceiling. And so I'm going to change it up. And then what happens? You get distracted, you take your eye off of this ball, and now you get into your identification zone. And that identification zone is basically your opportunity to say, hey, wait a second, I wasn't ready for the vision because I didn't hold on to this winning activity long enough to beat this curve. When you beat this curve, now what you're doing is you're representing a change in floor. Enough time going over what was winning for you will create a new foundation and your floor will start to move. When your floor moves to here, now your revenue that was here can only hit to here. And so if you were to do, and most likely, right, most of us know that you can't do the same thing that got you to this point to do it again, but you'll notice that now you have a whole new set of things to work on. And so what does a ceiling break look like? Well, let's talk about that. So when it comes to ceilings, this is really about our mindset and overcoming the fear that we might have, because a ceiling really is just a glass one every single time. There is no hard ceiling unless it's regulatory or legal. There might be some actual ceilings there, ethical, right? Those things are real ceilings. But when it comes to actually overcoming it, right? We all have 24 hours in the day. That's a hard ceiling. You're not going to be able to reinvent time and space. If you do, let me know. That would be super cool. I want to talk to you. But nonetheless, your ceiling is typically just because of your vision, right? And so your vision has to expand, which requires new people. It requires innovation. It requires differentiated thought. And most of the time, entrepreneurs don't have a very good chance at overcoming their ceiling because they are worried about the operational components of the business, right? And so, in fact, this is one of the reasons why we built the business the way that we did. And this is not by any means a pitch, but we basically decided that, hey, we need something that helps entrepreneurs raise their ceiling, and we need something that helps them raise their floor. And so on the floor side, we said, hey, let's just do the operations for you. Right? We're just going to take your operations over for you, and that's going to be a floor raising activity. So now our visionary founders can focus on the ceiling raising, and we can focus on the floor. But then likewise, we had some people who were really good executors, and they had no idea how to grow this. And so this is where you have leadership coaching, right? And you have networking and masterminds and consultants, right? This allows you to be expansive. Hell, read a book, right? This allows you to overcome some of the obstacles that you had before. And so now, as this ceiling starts to change, this is when, if we had a ceiling that was here for this stage of the business, we might have started at, hey, $0, right? We all start there. And then let's say that your ceiling was 10K a month. Then all of a sudden, you come back down. Great. Then all you need to do is raise your floor, right? And so what's going to happen is, let's say that we raise the floor to here. Now you're at basically 5K at your floor. And now you're 10K up here. Then you're basically going to be vibrating back and forth between there until you figure out how to raise your ceiling. And raising your ceiling might be adding a new team member. Raising your ceiling might be changing the process. Raising your ceiling might be tweaking your offer. There's all kinds of things that are ceiling raising activities. Most of the time, hell, even price, right? If you pull the price lever, then just going 10% up on price, you just change your ceiling. Because now the same people that were paying you before are paying you a little bit more. And so now you have 11K. But most of us, what we see on the internet, when we're watching all these videos, we see people and the stories, because we're psychologically pre-primed to really like this kind of stuff. We want to see people go to this $1 million a month from zero, and we want to see it rapid, and we want to basically talk about this ceiling rise. And what we fail to realize is that a lot of these people, they've never actually raised in the floor. And if they never raise the floor, then that's a lot of times why you see the success story, and then the success story goes back down. Because they never really invested in the foundation, they never invested in the team, the processes, the systems that would actually get their business to be consistent. And so, yeah, they peaked, right? They went viral, if you will. And so that can be really dangerous to how we feel about our own personal beliefs and our own capabilities, because that would be a huge bias to have a one-time event, peak our ceiling, and now we put so much pressure on ourselves to overcome it every single time. Because at the end of the day, you're only as good as the relationship between your floors and your ceilings. So the last thing that I'll say is that when we as people or as businesses, when we improve 20%, a lot of this stuff breaks. And so every time your top line goes up 20%, then also you should try to have some activity to focus on your floor raising as well. So I hope that helps you understand floors and ceilings. And if you want to hear more content like that, please engage with us. We really appreciate every single comment. We look at them, we reply to them. And if you have any clarifications or questions, we're just happy to help, because these are concepts that I wish people taught me, and I just want to give them to you. I hope that you make use of them, and I will see you in the next video. Make sure that you hit subscribe, like, the bell, all of those things. And before we jump off, we do have to make sure that we show some appreciation for our production team, because they are hard at work behind the scenes to make sure that you get really quality videos. So if this is the first time to your channel, meet our production assistant, Luna. She, I believe, is ready. Yes, we keep her hidden in the corner here. Yep, okay, and she got it. So she's taken care of, and she's all good. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next time.